Hey, good morning, everybody. Boy. Well, if this is your first time with us this morning in a while, or you're coming right at the end of a sermon series called Heroes, and over the last 6 weeks, we've taken a tour through the history of Israel in the Old Testament, except we've done it in the style of like an independent movie, where the timeline's just all over the place. It starts at the end, and then it jumps back to the beginning, and now we're almost to the end, and now it's in the middle, and now we just realize that if they told the story in order, it wouldn't have been a very good story. That's just the independent movie, not the Old Testament. So today we're talking about the ending, at least the ending of the Old Testament, and we're going to go through it real quick. There's an outline in your bulletin if you want to follow along and fill in the blank, if you like that sort of thing. I never got into that. I feel like if you want me to fill in the blank, I'm not going to do it, But I think it's a great thing. So we didn't cover any of the heroes or patriarchs and matriarchs in Genesis, but that's where Israel's story begins, with the story of God calling Abraham, and everything that happened with his children and grandchildren, leading them to Egypt. Will you clear the background on that? That's distracting me. There we go, thank you. Where their family grew into a nation of 12 tribes. That became so big that the Egyptians enslaved them, which led to Moses. God sent Moses to liberate his people and lead them into the promised land. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years while God made them into a people that were governed by his law and his spirit, which practically speaking meant waiting a bunch of them out. God always has that prerogative. Until they did go in and conquer the land that God had promised them. And once they did, they were led by those that we call judges. They get their own book. One of them was Deborah, who was wise and brave and sat under a palm tree when she wasn't leading men into battle. But eventually the people wanted to be like other nations, so they asked their final judge, Samuel, to request God for a king. And God relented, and that led to their age of kings, of whom David was the greatest. We talked about him, though his son Solomon was a pretty near second. But most of them weren't that great, which is the problem with supreme executive authority, which is what God warned them about in the beginning. So God sent prophets and prophets to try and turn the people back to him. Jonah was one of those. But those prophets weren't able to make enough headway. And as a consequence, the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered. And then so was the southern kingdom of Judah. The nation of Israel was dissolved, and its inhabitants were carried away into exile. That's where stories like Esther's come in. They're the stories of how God's people kept their distinctive identity and relationship with God in a new and hostile environment. It's how they learned that religion isn't about power and being able to tell other people how to live. It's about faith and following God, no matter what anyone else does. So I tell you all that this morning for two reasons. One, I sure hope you're reading the Bible at home. And when you do, you need to know the context of what you're reading. If you flip open the Bible and you pick a passage, you won't really understand what you're reading if you don't know which of these time periods it comes out of. And the Bible wasn't written to you, but it was written for you. So you have to know more about it so that it can be more meaningful for you. Megan's actually going to talk about this more next week when we kick off this new series, Confirmation for Everyone. Now, the other reason that I need to tell you all that is that our hero today is one of the heroes of the return to Jerusalem. That's the fifth part of Israel's history in the Old Testament, the return. So, to sum up real quickly, Israel was in Egypt for around 400 years. It's a long time. They were ruled by judges for another 400. They had a united kingdom for around 150, and then the northern kingdom carried on for around 200 before they were carried into exile, while the southern kingdom made another 340 years before they were exiled into Babylon. And if you don't think that 1,000 years of history of God's people matters, well, I don't know what to say. Of course it matters. The past is prologue. And the story of Israel is inexorably linked to the land, whether they possessed it or not. And it's also the driving factor behind our story today about our final hero. You see, the people of Israel were allowed to return to the land because the empire that conquered them got conquered themselves. And so the new ruler was better than the old one and said that all the Jewish people could go back to Jerusalem and to their hometowns if they wanted to. And many of them did. Just as soon as they were allowed to go, they went back. But many more didn't. Many more of them had built new lives. They had gotten married and had children and grandchildren. They had businesses. They planted roots. One of those people was our hero today, Nehemiah. We're just going to do him for 1 week. The kids in Sunday school are doing him for the whole month. But Nehemiah was born in Babylon. He was one of those children and grandchildren that was born to the deported Jews that they had while they were captive there. And the book of the Bible that bears his name is actually his memoir. So it starts like this. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Chislev in the 20th year while I was in Susa, the capital. So Babylon was all he had ever known. And I would imagine that he loved it. Nehemiah had a great job in the royal court of the king. He was well connected. He was probably well off. But it's also clear that his parents and his community raised him to keep his Jewish identity, even as he climbed the ladder of success in Babylon. Goes on and says that one of my brothers, Hanani, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them about the Jews that survived, those who had escaped the captivity, and about Jerusalem. You see, Nehemiah cares deeply about Jerusalem, a city he had never lived in, though perhaps he had visited, but which he heard about every day as a child growing up, even more so at holidays like Passover. They replied, the survivors there in the province who escaped captivity are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Now, I want you to read Nehemiah this week, and I want you to read his prayer that's next, because it's beautiful and it's instructive. You should read it. We could do a whole series just on Nehemiah. I read about one church that did Nehemiah for 8 months. 8 months. This prayer would take up a week or two. It's that good. So after praying, fasting, and weeping, Nehemiah comes up with a plan. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was served him, I carried the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. So the king said to me, why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This can only be sadness of the heart. This is Nehemiah's big plan. be sad. He's close enough with the king of the empire of Persia that he knows just being sad in his presence will cause the king of the entire Persian Empire to stop what he's doing and ask him how he is. That should give us an idea of Nehemiah, of his position and his power, and the character of this king. It goes on, it says, "Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, 'May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my ancestors' graves, lies waste, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?' Then the king said to me, 'What do you request?' So I prayed to the God of heaven, then I said to the king, 'If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask you to send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it.' The king said to me," the queen was also sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" I like this king. He gets right to the point. So the king sends him. He gives him letters to get through the borders. He gives him building supplies and soldiers to accompany him. So Nehemiah sets off on his quest, but not everyone is happy about it. Verse 2:10, "When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel." These guys are going to show up throughout the whole book and cause trouble for Nehemiah. So Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem, and he doesn't tell anyone why he's there. He sneaks out in the middle of the night, and he inspects everything. He does it in secret so that he can really think things over. And once he makes a thorough inspection, he calls a meeting of the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest that were to do the work. So then he takes a deep breath. And then I said to them, he says, "You see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace." I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon me, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. Then they said, "Let us start building." So they committed themselves to the common good. And then they all get to work. In chapter 3, Nehemiah takes such care to list every single person who helped and what they did. When you read Nehemiah, don't skip over chapter 3. Because you have to look at how he follows the circle of the wall around the city and mentions absolutely everyone. Like, then the high priest Eliashib sent to work with his fellow priests and rebuilt the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set up its doors. And the men of Jericho built next to him, and next to them Zachar, son of Imri, built. The sons of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set up its doors, its bolts, and its bars. Next to them Meremoth made repairs. He gives credit to everyone who helped, and he calls out the people who wouldn't. Next to them the Tekoites made repairs, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work of their Lord. He should have helped Tekoite nobles. Nobles going around thinking they're too fancy to work. But guess who's naming names in his memoirs going in the Bible? Nehemiah. It goes on and on and on, and it's classic. If Nehemiah had a smartphone, it would be as full of construction pics as mine is full of dog photos. In English, this chapter is 883 words about who helped and what they did. And that was written on scrolls in Hebrew first and hand copied by scribes and monks for nearly 2,000 years. Isn't that amazing? I mean, if you ever think that construction work doesn't matter, just think about that for a minute. Every Bible that has ever been printed, either by a printing press or copied out by hand, by candlelight, mentions that Hassenaah built the fish gate and that the Tekoite nobles were too fancy to get their hands dirty. I kind of get misty just thinking about it. It matters. It matters. It really does. So we rebuilt the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. They really had a mind to work. They got into this project, and it's all they could think about until it was done. They wouldn't stop when their enemies started talking about how bad their work was, or when those same enemies got angry and threatened to come and attack them to stop them from doing it. Chapter 4 talks about that, how instead of stopping, how instead of getting pulled into the fight, that they just took turns working. And they switched off between working on the wall and standing guard. And then they worried that they were losing too much work time, and so they decided that every worker would just keep his sword slung in his tool belt. But they didn't stop. They wouldn't stop until it was done. And one success led to another success for Nehemiah, and he became the governor of Jerusalem, and he was wise and good. He was a hero. Now, Nehemiah shows us three things about heroes. The first thing he shows us is about picking our battles. I'm struck by the fact that Nehemiah had a pretty nice life going for himself in the capital. You know, he worked in a fancy place surrounded by important people. No doubt he got to drink the finest wines in the world. But when he heard about Jerusalem's broken down wall, he just left. He left it all. We don't celebrate people like him enough. They make us nervous. They make us feel bad about ourselves. If Nehemiah was alive today and he heard about Jerusalem's walls, I wonder if he would still have jumped into action. Would he have helped, or would he have said, "Oh, wow, I'd love to help. I really would, but I just can't leave what I'm doing right now. I've got a 5-year plan." Sending thoughts and prayers to those who can afford the luxury of helping. Or maybe he would have said, "I'm sure that Jerusalem needs new walls, but I wasn't the one who broke them. So I don't see why I should be the one to fix them." I think we get awfully put out by the troubles of the world interfering with our personal stories, don't we? Kind of reminds me of the scene in The Lord of the Rings where Frodo was a bit stricken by the responsibility that's been thrust upon him. He was really enjoying the hobbit life of second breakfasts. Then it all gets ruined. He says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us." You know, it's so tempting to long for another time, for a simpler time. It's not fair to have to clean up our ancestors' and our neighbors' messes. I, frankly, don't want to have to deal with COVID or with climate change or with systemic racism. It would be simpler and easier to live as if they didn't exist. But Nehemiah shows us that heroes accept the trouble of their time as their own. Heroes accept the trouble of their time as their own. Heroes accept the responsibility, even though they don't accept the fault. Heroes accept that whatever trouble has appeared is theirs to deal with, or it's just going to get worse. Heroes accept the troubles of their time as their own. And we all of us need to be heroes right now. That's the first thing that Nehemiah shows us. The second has to do with all the opposition that Nehemiah faced. There were people who just hated him and hated what he was doing. They tried to sabotage him. They threatened to attack him and his workers. These people opposed Nehemiah, and they opposed him because they didn't want to see Jerusalem get rebuilt. But it seems to me that the people who oppose today's Nehemiahs, they do it because they don't want to admit there's a problem. When people don't like the message, they attack the messenger. You see, modern Nehemiahs need to learn from the original one and expect opposition. We've gotten too weak. If we get opposition, everything grinds to a halt, doesn't it? While we consult with everyone we know to confirm that whoever opposes us is wrong and that we're right. If someone opposes us, we get offended. How dare they? We have to change their minds. We have to defend our honor. Someone's wrong. We need to show them that. No, that's stupid. When you read Nehemiah, you'll see that his answers to his opposition are short and strong. And then he gets back to work. He doesn't let those who oppose him set his schedule or his priorities. We need to be more like that and expect opposition. Third and finally, Nehemiah shows us that to be a hero means to simply do the work. Do the work. Nothing about Nehemiah would have been remembered, let alone been included in the Bible, if he hadn't done the work. And he's very clear about the fact that he didn't do the work alone. He had a team. He created a community. And he brought a holy city back to life. It took a hero like Nehemiah to lead them, but he had to lead them to do the work. That's true for everything in life, and I hope we all remember it. But right now, I'm looking out at people who are just as concerned as I am and as Megan is for the life and ministry of this church. You know, just like it was all the way back in Jerusalem 2,500 years ago, it's still up to the people to do the work. And just like in Nehemiah 3, the people did the work that was closest to their hearts. If you see something that needs to be done, do it. If you see a need, meet it. If you have an idea, act on it. Find your team and get to work. Amen. Well, now we're going to do the work of the offering. And our offering is a big thing that we use to do our work around here. So please join us, join our team in supporting the work of this church as we offer to God a portion of what he's already given to us. Let's worship God.
side.